They buried him at midnight in the part of the forest where nobody with any sense would ever go, the grove. That was what the old wolves called it, a ring of ancient oaks so thick with shadow that even the moon lost its nerve there. And it was into that black soil that they lowered the firstborn son of Oskhaven, heir to the throne, a prince who still breathed, a prince whose heart still beat, while his own brothers stood at the edge of the grave and watched. Torvin could not move. That was the cruelty of it. Whatever they had poured down his throat had stolen his body and left his mind wide awake, screaming behind lips that would not part. He felt the first clump of earth land on his chest, then his throat, then his face, cold and wet and heavy. He felt each one, he counted each one, because counting was the only thing left he could do. 3 days. That was how long the kingdom had already been weeping for him. 3 days since the criers went out with the lie. A hunting accident, a fall, a broken neck. 3 days his father had spent staring at an empty box, while the true prince lay chained in a cellar beneath the palace, alive and waiting. And tonight they had finally come for him. Somewhere above him, muffled through the dirt, he heard a voice he had known his entire life, a voice that had once cried beside him when they were boys, a voice that now said calm, as a man remarking on the weather, "Deeper. I want it deep enough that even the crows won't find him." His brother's voice. So this was how it ended. Not on a battlefield, not with honor, but in the dark, in the mud, put down like something diseased by the one person he had never once thought to guard himself against. The last thing Torvin felt before the weight of the earth pressed the final breath from his lungs was not fear, it was surprise, that he had been so foolish, for so long. Now, let me tell you about the woman who was not supposed to be there. Her name was Ysolde. And 3 moons ago, her own father had dragged her to the boundary stones of their pack's territory and thrown her across them like a sack of spoiled grain. She remembered his face when he did it. That was the thing about being cast out. People imagine it happens with rage, with shouting, with claws. But her father had not been angry. His face had been calm, bored almost, as if he were carrying out something that had begun to rot. Behind him in the doorway of the only home she had ever known, her sister Sorel had watched, arms folded, mouth curved in the faintest, coldest satisfaction, and around them dozens of wolves. Wolves who had known Isolde since she was a pup, wolves who had eaten at her family's fire. Not one of them said a word. That was the part that stayed with her. Not the cold of the boundary stones, not the long walk into a forest that did not want her, but the silence. The great crushing silence of an entire people deciding all at once that she had never really existed at all. Rejected. That was the word for what she was now. In the tongue of wolves, a rejected omega ranked below a servant, below a prisoner, below the dirt under a healthy wolf's claws. They were said to be cursed, contaminated. Most did not live to see their first winter alone. Ysolde had lived through 3 moons, but living and surviving are not the same thing, and she knew it better than anyone. So on the night the prince was buried, she was not thinking about princes. She was thinking about mushrooms, about roots, about the terrible patient emptiness in her belly that woke her every night and would not let her sleep. She moved through the trees on silent feet, her cloak worn so thin it might as well have been cobweb hunting for anything at all that might buy her one more day. Which is how she came to the edge of the grove, the one place even the desperate did not go. And that is when she smelled it. Blood. Fresh, sharp and metallic on the damp autumn air. And beneath the blood, something else. Something that made the wolf inside her lift its head and go very, very still. An alpha scent. Rich. Powerful. The kind of scent that in a healthy world would have sent a rejected omega running for her life. Except this scent was wrong. It was fading, guttering like a candle in a draft. It was dying. Every instinct she owned told her to leave. Rejected omegas who stumbled into pack business did not live to speak of it. This was not her fight. These were not her wolves. She had nothing to gain, and everything, the little everything she had left to lose. Her feet carried her forward anyway. The clearing opened before her, and the moon, which had lost its nerve in the trees, found it again here. Silver light spilled across churned earth. Someone had been digging. The soil sat in careless mounds around a shallow, wrong-looking dip in the ground. And there, at the base of the oldest oak, a hand, pale fingers barely above the surface of the dirt, twitching. Ysolde's heart stopped, and then it broke into a gallop so hard it hurt. She was across the clearing before she had decided to move on her knees in the cold mud, and her hands, her thin, calloused, useless hands, were already tearing at the earth. The soil was packed tighter than it looked. Whoever had done this had done it with terrible care. Her nails split, her fingertips tore, stones bit into her palms, and she felt the warm slick of her own blood, and she did not stop. Because someone was down there, someone alive, and she, of all the creatures in this world, knew exactly what it was to be buried by the people who should have loved you. She dug until her shoulders burned. She dug until she could no longer feel her fingers. She dug until she uncovered a face. A man's face. Young. No more than 25 summers. Sharp features gone gray under a mask of soil and blood. Dark hair matted flat against the earth. His eyes were closed. His lips were blue. She pressed her ruined hand to his chest, and under her palm, faint and stuttering and unwilling to quit, she felt it. A heartbeat. "No," she whispered to no one. "No, no, you don't. Not tonight." She cleared his nose, his mouth, tilted his head back the way her grandmother had taught her a lifetime ago, and his chest rose. Barely. Then fell. Then rose again. He was breathing. He was still in this world, but only just and only by a thread. She got her arms under his shoulders and pulled. How was heavy, impossibly heavy. All alpha muscle and dead weight, and her small, starved frame had no business moving him at all. But she braced her feet in the loose earth, and she hauled him free inch by grunting inch, and when at last he came loose from the grave, she fell back into the mud with him half across her, both of them gasping, both of them filthy, both of them against all odds alive. That was when the moonlight caught his shirt. The silver thread. The sigil no common wolf would ever be permitted to wear. The royal crest of Oskhaven. The cold that went through Ysolde then had nothing to do with the autumn air. She knew this face. Everyone in the kingdom knew this face. It was on the coins and purses she would never carry. It was in the songs the balladeers sang in taverns she would never enter. Prince Torvin, firstborn son of Alpha King Bramwell, heir to the throne of Oskhaven. The prince the whole kingdom had been mourning for 3 days. A hunting accident, the palace had said. A fall. A broken neck. A kingdom draped in black. Except here he was, breathing in the mud, warm dirt still packed under his royal fingernails. Someone had lied. Someone had murdered a prince, kept the body breathing in the dark for 3 days, and told a whole kingdom a story about it. And now that someone's secret was lying in the arms of a rejected Omega, who was not even supposed to be alive. She understood in that moment exactly what she was holding, her own death, because who would ever believe her an Omega? A cast-out, a creature ranked below the dirt, found alone with the missing prince blood on her hands, the grave dug open beside her. There was not a court in the kingdom that would ask a single question before they killed her. She had to leave. Now. She had to stand up and walk into the trees and pretend she had never smelled blood on the autumn wind. She was halfway to her feet when his hand shot out and closed around her wrist. His grip was weak, but it was desperate. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, drowning in pain, and the slow return of air to a starved brain. They searched the dark, and they found her face and held it the way a drowning man holds driftwood. "Don't," he rasped, barely a breath. "Don't leave me." And that was when she heard them. Footsteps, more than one set, crashing through the undergrowth toward the clearing, and torchlight orange and hungry flickering between the distant trees. They were coming back. Whoever had buried a prince alive was returning to be sure the job was finished. Ysolde did not think. Thinking would have gotten them both killed. She grabbed his arms and she pulled, dragging him toward the black tangle of brambles at the clearing's edge. He tried to help. His legs pushed weakly at the ground, useless, and he was dead weight her body should never have been able to move. She moved him anyway. They tumbled into the thorns just as the torchlight broke the trees. She clamped her hand over his mouth and pressed her whole body over his, flattening them both into the dirt and the dark, and through the gaps in the brambles she watched. 3 men, warriors by the breadth of them, and the swords at their hips. Dark clothing, no crest, faces swallowed by hoods. One of them carried a shovel. They stopped at the open grave, and for a long moment, not one of them made a sound. Then the largest one cursed, low and vicious. He's gone. Impossible. Look at the dirt. Someone dug him out. No one comes here. No one knew. Clearly, the large one said and kicked at the scattered soil. Someone did. Beneath Isolde's hand, the prince had gone rigid. She could feel his heart slamming now wild against her ribs. Spread out, the large one ordered. Find him. If he reaches the palace, if he tells anyone the kingdom's been mourning a lie for 3 days. And who believes him? The third one said. Younger, nervier. Prince Alaric's already been named heir. The king's already wept over an empty box. Even if the dead man crawls into the throne room, who takes his word over a crown? The name landed in Isolde's chest like a fist. Prince Alaric, the dead man's own brother. Beside her, she felt Torvin stop breathing entirely. She felt the exact moment the words reached him. She felt something inside him, something she could not see, but could feel through every point where their bodies touched, break clean in half. She knew that feeling. She had worn it herself, at a boundary stone, 3 moons ago. Find him anyway, the large one said. And this time no grave. This time we bring back his head. The men fanned out into the trees, torches swinging, shadows lunging and shrinking across the churned earth. Isolde held her breath until her lungs screamed and her vision swam, and still she did not move. And the prince did not move. He only stared at the place where the men had stood, and on his face was a thing so raw she had to look away from it. Betrayal has a particular shape. She would have known it anywhere. They waited. The torchlight faded. The footsteps thinned to nothing. The forest folded its silence back over the clearing like a wound closing. Only then did she lift her hand from his mouth. "Can you stand?" she whispered. He tried. He made it halfway up before his legs stopped obeying him, and he pitched forward and she caught him, staggering her arms, wrapping his torso to keep them both off the ground. "Easy," she breathed. "Easy." His scent washed over her, close and overwhelming. Alpha through and through, even ruined as he was. Dominance and power, and something underneath it all that reminded her absurdly of pine forests in winter. It should have frightened her. Every story she had ever been told said an alpha this near an unmated omega was a danger. But this alpha could barely hold his own head up. He was leaning on her as though she were the only solid thing left in a world that had just dropped out from under him. "My brother," he said, and his voice was wrecked. "Alaric did this." "I heard." A laugh scraped out of him. There was no humor in it. "He always wanted the throne. His jaw worked. "I never thought he'd want me in the ground to get it." "Where will you go?" "I don't know." His weight shifted against her, and she felt the deep tremor running through all that muscle. Blood loss, exhaustion, whatever poison of stillness they had poured into him. "If I go to the palace, he finishes it. He has my father's ear. He has the guard. He has—" He stopped, swallowed. "He has everything, and I have a shovel load of dirt and a rejected omega." Isolde felt the words like a slap, though she was not certain he had meant them to sting. And she should have left him. That was the sensible thing. Point him toward the nearest village, vanish back into the trees where she belonged. This was not her war. These were not her enemies. She had learned hard and slow that helping people cost her more than she could ever get back. But she remembered a hand rising from the grave. She remembered a grip on her wrist and 2 words breathed into the dark. "Don't leave me." "I know a place," she heard herself say, and could have bitten her own tongue off. "Abandoned, safe enough, at least until you can walk without falling on your face." His eyes found hers in the darkness. And even weak, even shattered, there was something sharp in that gaze, something that measured her, weighed her, turned her over to check for a hidden blade. "Why," he said quietly, "would you help me? Does it matter? You're a rejected omega. I can smell it on you. There's nothing you gain by touching this." His breath came ragged. So yes, it matters. It's the only thing that matters, because the last person I trusted put me in a hole in the ground. She held his gaze, and for the first time in 3 moons, she told the whole truth to another living soul. Because I know what it feels like, she said, to be buried by the people who were supposed to protect you. And I couldn't walk away from a hand reaching up out of the dirt. That's all. That's the whole ugly reason. Something moved across his face. Recognition. He looked at her the way you look at a mirror you did not expect to find in a dark room. If you help me, he said slowly, gathering the words like a man lifting stones. If you keep me alive and help me prove what my brother has done, I will give you back everything they took. Your name, your pack, your standing. I'll make every wolf who watched you cast out kneel and beg your pardon. Why Soldi said nothing. It was a beautiful promise. She had learned not to trust beautiful things. And if I die anyway, she asked, then you'll have died trying to right a wrong, which is more than most wolves in this kingdom can say. His grip tightened on her arm, steadying himself, and his voice dropped to something colder. But understand me, Omega. I trust no one now. Not you. Not the ground I'm standing on. I'll take your help. Don't mistake it for anything softer. Don't expect gratitude. Don't expect kindness. My brother taught me tonight exactly what those things are worth. I don't want your kindness, Ysolde said, and she meant it. I just need you to not die on the walk. You're heavy and I'm tired and I'd rather not carry a corpse. The ghost of something crossed his ruined face. It was almost a smile. It was gone before it finished forming. Fair enough, he said. So she shifted his weight onto her shoulder, and she turned him toward the deep forest, and they began to walk. They had gone perhaps 100 paces when he stopped. Just stopped dead so suddenly that she nearly went down under his weight. His nostrils flared, his head turned toward her, and even ruined, even half-dead, those alpha senses were sharper than any omegas would ever be. He was scenting her. Her wait, he said, and his voice had changed. The exhaustion was still there, but under it now was a blade. There's something else. Isolde's stomach dropped. You were just buried alive, she said, keeping her voice flat and bored. Your senses are ruined. Keep walking. My senses, he said, are never ruined. His eyes narrowed on her in the dark. There's something under the Omega scent. Something that doesn't belong. Something that... He searched for the word and could not find it. What are you? She kept moving. She forced him to stumble along beside her, hoping the effort would knock the question out of his head. It did not. I smell it, he pressed, harder now, suspicious. The trust he did not have curdling into something worse. Under everything else. Tell me what you are, or I promise you, I'll sit down in this forest right now and let them find us both. They reached a stream. Ysolde took it as an excuse, easing him down against a fallen log and cupping cold water in her bleeding hands and bringing it to his cracked lips. He drank like a man who had forgotten water existed, but his eyes never left her face, not once. You saved my life, he said when he had finished, quieter now. I meant what I said before, that I owe you no kindness. But I'm not a fool either. And a man who's just learned his own blood will bury him alive needs to know exactly what he's trusting. So tell me, what are you hiding? Ysolde sat back on her heels. She waited. She could lie. She had gotten good at lying these 3 moons. She could spin some tale of rare bloodlines and unusual heritage, and he would half believe it because he wanted to. But she was so tired, tired of hiding, tired of the word that had followed her from the boundary stones like a shadow. And perhaps just this once, she was tired of being the only one who knew the shape of her own curse. I have a gift, she said, or a curse, depending entirely on who you ask, and every wolf I've ever met has called it a curse. He waited. When I touch someone who's hurt, she said, I can heal them. But it doesn't go away. The wound doesn't just close, it moves. She held up her torn, bleeding fingers to the moonlight. It comes to me. Their pain becomes mine. Their broken bones break in my body instead. I don't mend people. I trade places with them. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the small, endless conversation of the stream. That's why they threw you out, he said at last. Your own pack. My father called it demon magic. Her voice stayed flat. She had learned long ago that feeling these memories only sharpened their teeth. He said I was contaminated in the womb, that my mother had lain with something that wasn't a wolf. When I was young, I healed a pup who'd been trampled under a cart. Everyone saw the wounds leave the pup and bloom on me. After that, they looked at me like I was something that had crawled up out of a bad dream. She shrugged, and it cost her more than it should have. And when my father wanted a reason to be rid of me 3 moons ago, my gift was the excuse sitting right there, ready to use. Torvin studied her for a long moment. In the moonlight, his features looked carved from cold stone, the kind of face that belonged on the coins she would never carry in the great halls she would never enter. Not here in the mud beside a rejected Omega with blood drying on her hands. Show me, he said. She blinked. What? I'm hurt. He gestured at his torso where his torn shirt gaped over a spread of dark bruising along his ribs. Heal it. Show me this gift of yours is real, and not a story you're telling to keep me walking. You don't understand. It comes to me. All of it. If I heal you fully, I take everything you're carrying, and you are carrying a great deal. Then heal me halfway. His gaze was steady, testing. Just enough. Prove you're what you say you are. This was a mistake. She knew it was a mistake even as her hand rose. But he was watching her with those cold, assessing eyes, deciding whether she was a tool or a threat, and she understood with a sinking certainty that this one moment would decide everything that came after it. So she reached out, slowly. Her fingers found his side pressed gently against the bruised ribs, and she closed her eyes and breathed deep and reached down past her own heartbeat to the strange warmth that lived in the dark beneath it. It rose to meet her touch. It always did. It poured down her arm like liquid heat. Torvin gasped. She felt his pain enter her, the sharp, screaming ache of cracked bone blooming across her own ribs, stealing her breath. Not all of it. She pulled her hand back before the trade could finish. But enough. Enough to prove. When she opened her eyes, he had lifted his shirt and was staring down at himself. The bruising had gone from black to a fading yellow. The swelling had dropped. And then his gaze slid to where she sat, clutching her own side, where fresh dark bruising was spreading beneath the thin cloth of her dress. You weren't lying, he breathed. I don't lie, she said, and lowered her hand and pushed the borrowed pain down where she kept all the rest of it. I just don't tell the truth unless someone forces me to. The cold suspicion in his face did not vanish, but it cracked. It made room at the edges for something else. Something that might in a better man on a better night have grown into wonder. You could have done this in the grove, he said slowly. When you first pulled me out, you could have healed me completely right there in the dirt. Why didn't you? Because healing you completely would have killed me, Isolde said. And I did not survive 3 moons alone in this forest just to die in a clearing for a stranger, even a stranger with a crown. That almost smile again, real this time, gone almost as fast. Fair enough, he said, for the second time that night. The abandoned mill sat another hour's walk into the deep forest, and by the time they reached it, he was leaning on her with his full weight, his breath tearing in and out of him in ragged strips. She settled him near the cold hearth and wrapped her single threadbare blanket around his shoulders, and she noticed then that he was shivering. Shivering despite the alpha heat that should have kept him warm through a far colder night than this one. Whatever they had poured into him to still his body was still working through his blood. Rest, she told him. I'll keep watch. His eyes were already closing, but before sleep took him his hand found hers in the dark once more. Why sold, he said, rough and low. She went still. She had told him her name somewhere on the long walk, she realized without ever noticing she had done it. Thank you, he said. 2 words. Small ones. But no one had thanked Isolde for anything in 3 moons. Perhaps longer than that. Perhaps she could not remember the last time at all. She did not trust her voice to answer, so she said nothing. She only sat beside him in the dark and watched the moon crawl slow across the dusty floor, her ribs aching with a pain that was not her own, wondering how a stranger's hand in hers could feel so much like a thing she had been missing her entire life without ever once being able to name it. She must have slept. She never meant to. But when the door crashed open, she was too slow and the world had already gone wrong. A figure filled the doorway, black against the gray of coming dawn. Female. Tall. Cold and beautiful in a way, Isolde knew better than she knew her own reflection. "There you are," said Sorel. Isolde was on her feet before she had finished the thought, planting herself between her sister and the sleeping prince. "I knew," Sorel went on, stepping inside without invitation, her voice thick with satisfaction, "that if I followed a blood trail through this forest long enough, I'd find you at the end of it, playing savior. Again. Bleeding yourself dry for something too broken to be worth saving. It's the only thing you were ever good at, little sister. How did you truly think father wouldn't have eyes on the border?" Sorel's gaze slid past her to the figure wrapped in blankets by the cold hearth, and her eyes went wide. Then they went bright. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, sister, what have you found?" "Sorel, don't." "The missing prince." Sorel's smile spread slow across her face, and it was the cruelest thing Isolde had ever seen. "The one the whole kingdom is weeping over. Do you have any idea what that's worth? Prince Alaric has let it be known he's very concerned about rumors, very generous to anyone who can put his worries to rest. Sorel, please. You think this saves you?" Her sister's voice dropped soft and vicious, and somehow it carried perfectly in the small stone room. "You think a dying prince changes what you are. He doesn't know yet, but he will. And when he learns the truth about you, sister, about what happened the night our mother died, about what you did to father." Behind Isolde in the dark, she heard the prince stir, and she knew with a sinking, bottomless certainty that he had heard every single word. For a moment no one in that little stone room moved, and then the prince spoke from the dark by the cold hearth, in a voice that had no business belonging to a man who had been buried alive the night before. "Leave." Just that, one word. But it landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples of it touched every corner. Because there was something in that word that neither Isolde nor her sister had heard in 3 long moons. The unmistakable weight of alpha command. The voice of a wolf born to be obeyed. And even ruined, even half dead, even wrapped in a beggar's blanket on a dirt floor, the authority in it made Sorel's cruel smile falter at the edges. She recovered. She always did. "Your Highness." She dipped into a curtsy so mocking it was almost a slap. "Forgive me. I wasn't aware the dead gave orders." Torvin pushed himself up. Isolde saw exactly what it cost him. The white knuckles, the tremor, the way his breath hitched and caught. But he got to his feet and he did not sway and he did not lean on the wall and he did not, she noticed, step behind her. He stepped up beside her. Not hiding, standing. "If I'm dead," he said, "then the story your new prince is selling the kingdom is a lie, and a woman who knows a royal secret is a woman with 2 roads in front of her. One ends with her family raised up when the truth comes out. The other ends with her family buried under it." His gaze fixed on Sorel, cold and steady as winter. "Choose carefully." Sorel's eyes darted between them, and Isolde watched the arithmetic happen behind them. Her sister was many things: cruel, proud, vain. But she had never once in her life been stupid. "The truth," Sorel said slowly, "is whatever the man on the throne says it is. And right now that man is your brother. He has the palace. He has the guard. Your father hasn't left his chambers since they told him you were dead." A pause. A small, poisoned smile. "They say the king hasn't spoken a word in days." Isolde felt the prince go very still beside her. "My father is alive." Alive, Sorel let the word hang, but broken. It's a strange thing watching grief take an alpha apart. Prince Alaric handles all the royal business now. Your father just sits and stares and says nothing at all. Isolde watched Torvin's jaw work. She could not read the whole of what moved across his face, but she caught the edges of it. His father thought him dead, was mourning him into silence, while his brother sat on his throne and quietly closed every door. "Tell anyone you saw us," Torvin said, "and hear me clearly. When I take back what's mine, and I will take it back, your family will answer for every word you speak against me tonight." "Threats," Sorel said, from a man with dirt still in his hair. But her voice had lost its music. She was recalculating. Isolde could see it. Perhaps I'll keep your little secret, for now. Perhaps I'll simply stand back and watch which way the wind decides to blow. Do that. Sorel's gaze slid to Isolde then, and something ugly and old flickered in it. I was there that night too, sister, she said softly. I was young, but I was old enough to remember father's face when he came out of that room. Old enough to know you did something to him no one has ever been able to explain. Her voice dropped lower still. The prince doesn't know what you are yet, but he will. And when he does, we'll see how long he keeps you at his side. Enough. The command cracked through the room like a whip breaking. Sorel actually flinched. And for one heartbeat she looked as if she might fight. It might dig in, might say the terrible thing she was so clearly aching to say. Then self-preservation won the way it always won with Sorel. She backed toward the door. She gave them both one last long look, memorizing them, filing them away for later use. And then she was gone, her footsteps fading into the gray hush before dawn. Silence poured back into the mill, and Isolde stood frozen where she was waiting for it. The turn, the questions. The moment the prince rounded on her and demanded to know what her sister had meant. He had every right, every reason. She had watched a man learn his own brother would murder him. She had no illusions left about what people did when they were afraid. Instead, Torvin swayed. She caught him before he hit the floor, guided him back down onto the blankets, and her hands, she noticed distantly, were steadier than they had any right to be. He was burning now. His skin scorched her palms. The paralytic was wearing off, but something else was taking its place, and it was worse. You need to rest, she said. I need answers. But his eyes were already sliding shut, exhaustion dragging him down into the dark, whether he wished it or not. What did she mean? What did you— You need to not die, Isolde said. The story can wait until you're not on fire. A sound came out of him. It might have been a laugh. Practical, he murmured. I've always admired practical. She settled beside him and pressed the back of her hand to his brow, and the heat of him frightened her. This was not the fever of a body fighting off exhaustion. This was too much, too fast, too wrong. She had healed a great many wounds in her life. She had never felt anything like the thing radiating off this man. Something was killing him, and it was not the grave. They could not stay in the mill. She knew it before the sun was fully up, because Sorel knew where it was. And a promise from Sorel was worth exactly as much as the coin someone was willing to pay to break it. So when the morning broke, gray and cold, Isolde got the prince to his feet and led him deeper into the forest along paths she had mapped over 3 moons of running. Deer trails, dry stream beds, ground that held no tracks. He struggled to keep pace. His strength came back in fragments and left again just as fast, and always underneath it, the fever burned. By midday, they reached the old watchtower. It had stood abandoned on that hill for longer than anyone living could remember. Its stones had crumbled. Its roof had caved. But the cellar beneath it was dry and whole and swallowed by overgrown brush, forgotten by the patrols that swept these hills, and Isolde had found it in her first desperate week alone and claimed it as one of several holes she could crawl into when the world came hunting. We'll be safe here, she said, guiding him down the narrow stone stairs. A few days at least. The cellar was small, but it was hidden. There was a fire pit vented through a crack in the old foundation, and she had stocked the place in better times with dried meat and candles and blankets. And now she was grateful, fiercely grateful, for every hour of past paranoia. Torvin collapsed onto the bedding she had arranged, and in the wavering candlelight she finally saw how far gone he was. The gray of his skin, the bruised hollows under his eyes. This was no ordinary recovery. Something was eating him from the inside. Let me see, she said. I didn't argue. He was past pride now. She helped him out of the ruined shirt, her fingers brushing skin that burned like a brand pulled fresh from the fire. The bruises she had half healed the night before were gone completely. But there over his heart was something new. Black lines. Thin as spider silk, dark as spilled ink, spreading outward from a single point just below his collarbone. They forked and branched and threaded across his chest in a pattern so delicate and so terrible that for a moment she simply stared, unable to make her mouth work. "What is this?" she whispered. Torvin looked down at his own chest, and she watched something move across his face that was worse than surprise. It was recognition. "Nightshade," he said, quietly, almost gently, mixed with something else, something older. His hand rose and pressed flat against the black lines as if he could push them back down under his skin by will alone. "Alaric showed me the vial before they put me in the ground. He wanted me to see it. He wanted me to know exactly what was killing me while I still had the wits to understand it. Poison!" Ysoldi's hands hovered over the dark web of it, afraid to touch. "You knew. This whole time you knew, and you said nothing. Because there's nothing to say. There's no cure." His voice was flat, emptied out. "Nightshade alone would have killed me in hours. Whatever they bound it to, slowed it, stretched it. He wanted it slow. He wanted me to feel my own body fail me one piece at a time. But you're still alive. You're fighting it. For now." And he looked at her then, and she saw the truth of it sitting plain in his eyes. The acceptance. The exhaustion of a man who had already made his peace with the ground. "It grows," he said. "I can feel it. Stronger sometimes, weaker others. I haven't worked out the pattern." A grim breath. "I've had a great deal of time to lie still and try." Ysoldi's mind was already racing. Poison that grew stronger and weaker. Poison bound to something older. She thought of the old stories, the ones her grandmother used to whisper by the fire before her grandmother died, and the whispering stopped. "When it grows stronger," she said slowly. "What's happening in that moment? What are you feeling?" Torvin frowned. He turned the question over. "I don't—" And then he stopped. "The first time I felt it surge. It was in the mill, when your sister came through the door. And when I stood between you and her. Yes." His frown deepened. "And the second time, just now, when you took my shirt off and I let you see this." His eyes came up to hers. "When I trusted you enough to let you look." The understanding hit Ysold all at once, cold and complete, like plunging through the ice of a winter lake. "It feeds on it," she breathed. "On feeling. On connection. The more you care, the stronger it grows. The closer someone gets to you, the faster it kills you." Torvin was quiet for a long moment, and then he laughed. It was a terrible sound, harsh and broken and edged with something like awe. "Of course," he said. "Of course that's what he chose." He pressed his palm hard against the lines over his heart. "Alaric always told me I was soft, too attached, too quick to love people who didn't deserve it. He said it would be the end of me one day." Another laugh worse than the first. "It seems he decided to make certain of it." Isolde's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. A poison that fed on love, on closeness, on every soft thing that passed between two people, which meant every moment she stayed, every touch, every night she sat beside him in the dark, every time his hand found hers. She was killing him. "I should go," she said, and she was already pulling back, already scrambling to her feet. "I should put distance between us. If I'm what's feeding it, then no." His hand shot out and closed around her wrist, weak, desperate, the exact echo of a hand rising out of a grave. "Don't. Torvin, I am hurting you. Every hour I stay here, I'm hurting you." "Every hour you stay," he said, "is an hour I'm not alone." And his eyes were bright with fever, and with something else, something that made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with the borrowed bruises still fading from her ribs. "I have been alone my whole life, Isolde. Do you understand that? Surrounded by court and family and servants and guards, and utterly, completely alone. My mother died when I was young. My father shut himself away inside his duty and never came back out. And my brother—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "My brother smiled at me for 20 years while he planned to bury me alive." His grip loosened. His thumb moved once in a small, unconscious circle against the inside of her wrist. "If I'm going to die anyway, I'd rather die feeling something, even this, even the thing that's killing me, than live one more day feeling nothing at all." Ysolde did not pull away. She could not. which was she understood even then exactly the problem. 3 days they had in that cellar. Neither of them said the number out loud, but they both counted it. 3 days, while the black lines crept across a dying man's chest like frost across a window pane. 3 days of the strangest, cruelest arithmetic Ysolde had ever been forced to do, rationing touches, measuring words, trying to keep a man alive while knowing that every kindness she offered him was a spoonful of poison poured into his blood. She should have left, she knew it in the marrow of her, but he had made her promise to stay, and there had been something in his voice when he asked something raw and cracked and breaking that had stripped away her ability to say no. So she stayed, and she searched. The cellar held books, old ones mildewed and warped, left behind by whoever had lived in this ruin decades before her. Journals, mostly. Ysolde had never had much use for them. Now she read them by candlelight with the desperate hunger of a woman, digging with her bare hands, searching every water-stained page for anything at all about magical poison, about curses that fed on the heart, about cures that might against all reason exist. And on the third night, she found it. A single passage, underlined hard by a hand long turned to dust. The corruption of nightshade, when it is bound with blood magic, cannot be drawn out by ordinary means. It can be purged only by one whose gift runs in opposition to it. What is taken must be given. What is poisoned must be cleansed. But mark this well, the healer who absorbs it must also be strong enough to survive the transformation, for the corruption does not come quietly, and it does not come clean. Ysolde read it 3 times. Her hands had gone cold. Her gift, the very thing that had gotten her branded and cast out and thrown across a boundary stone. The curse her own father could not look at without flinching. It could save him. If she took the poison into herself, if she absorbed it the way she absorbed a broken bone or a torn wound, she could draw the corruption out of his blood and cleanse him. Except nightshade alone was death to anyone who swallowed it, and bound to blood magic, the amount she would have to pull into her own small body to purge him completely would almost certainly kill her. She looked at him where he slept fitful, full and burning on the makeshift bed. The black lines had reached his shoulder now. They were threading up toward his throat. His breath came shallow and labored. Days at most, perhaps fewer. There's a way. His eyes opened. She hadn't realized he was awake. What did you find? And Isolde hesitated. She could lie. She could tell him she'd found nothing, that she was still searching, that there was no hope in these rotting pages. He was too weak to read them himself. But she remembered what he had said to her. About trust. About 20 years of smiling lies. About a brother who buried him alive. My gift, she said quietly. I can pull the poison out of you, the way I pull out a wound. Hope crossed his face, bright and fast. And just as fast he crushed it. What happens to you, said, when you do? I don't know. A lie. She knew exactly, but if she told him, he would never let her try. You're lying, he said, gentle, certain. I can hear it, in your heartbeat. It's the one thing about you that's never learned to keep a secret. Ysolde looked away. The poison would come to me, she said finally. It would leave your blood and enter mine. And there are risks. You would die. Not a question. A statement laid flat on the table between them. Possibly. Definitely. Torvin pushed himself upright, and the effort of it made the black lines pulse dark against his skin. I know Nightshade Ysolde. I grew up in a court where knowing your poisons was a matter of staying alive at dinner. You cannot take this into your body and walk away from it. No one could. You don't know what I can walk away from. I won't let you die for me. It isn't your choice. The hell it isn't. He was on his feet now, swaying wrecked and blazing with a fury that had nowhere to go. I am not worth it. Do you hear me? I'm the fool who trusted his own brother, who never once saw the knife coming, who lay down in a grave and let them shovel dirt on his face without so much as a fight. I am not worth 1 hour of your life, let alone all of it. Stop! The word came out harder than she meant it to, and it stopped him cold. You don't get to decide what you're worth to me, Ysolde said, and her voice was shaking now, and she let it. You don't get to sit there and tell me the first person in 3 moons who looked at me like I mattered, the first soul in longer than I can remember, who said thank you and meant it doesn't deserve to be saved. I spent years believing I was nothing, that every wolf who turned away from me was right to do it. And I will not stand here and watch you say the same rotten thing about yourself. Torvin stared at her. Something moved behind his eyes. When you look at me, he said slowly, what do you see? And she should have deflected. She should have made a joke of it the way she made a joke of everything that came too close to the soft parts of her. Instead, she told the truth, because she was so tired of not telling it. I see a man who stood beside me instead of behind me when my sister came through that door, she said. A man who thanked a stranger for pulling him out of the dirt. A man who's dying and still spent his last strength trying to talk me out of saving him. Her voice broke right down the middle and she let it break. I see someone I care about, more than I should, more than I ever meant to. The black lines over his heart pulsed. She watched them spread another finger's width toward his throat. He saw it too. He looked down at his own chest, then back up at her, and the look on his face undid something in her that she did not know how to put back together. Every time I feel something for you, he said very quietly, it grows stronger. Every word between us that matters. It's feeding on this, on us. I know. Then you know what that means. He took a step toward her, then another, closer than was safe, close enough that she could feel the fever pouring off his skin like heat off a stone at midsummer. Caring about you is killing me, Isolde, and I find I don't much care. Tears burned behind her eyes. She refused to let them fall. I should leave, she whispered. I should have left days ago. It's the only sane thing left to do. Yes, he agreed. It would be the smart thing, the logical thing, the thing that keeps me breathing a little longer. His hand rose and found her face, cupping her cheek with fingers that trembled and burned. So do it. Walk out. Save my life the only way that leaves you alive at the end of it. Go. I can't. I know, he said. I tried too. Every night since you dug me out of the ground, I have tried to push you away, to build a wall, to not feel the thing I'm feeling. And every night I've failed. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Isolde, I love you. I've known it since the moment you reached into the dirt with your bare hands and refused to let me die alone down there in the dark. The black lines exploded across his skin. Torvin gasped. His whole body seized, folding forward, and his hand fell away from her face as he staggered back, clutching his chest. The poison was racing now, spreading visibly beneath the skin, black threads climbing his throat toward his jaw, and Ysolde caught him as his legs gave out. No, she sobbed. No, no, no. Stay with me. You stay with me, do you hear? You don't get to say that and then leave. His eyes found hers, already glazing, already going somewhere she could not follow. Worth it, he breathed, saying it. Worth it. Don't you dare. Tell me. His voice was fading to nothing. Tell me once. Let me hear it once before. She couldn't. The words would kill him. Every feeling they shared drove another inch of poison through his veins, and she knew it. She knew it better than she knew anything. But he was dying anyway. How was dying, and there was nothing left in the whole world she could do to stop it, and he deserved this man who had been buried by his own blood to hear it once before the end. I love you, she said, and the tears came and she let them. I love you, Torvin. His eyes closed. His body went still in her arms. And somewhere above them, muffled through the earth and stone, Isolde heard the drumming of horses. Many horses. Riders moving fast through the trees and hard male voices calling to one another with the cold discipline of trained hunters. They had found the watchtower. Isolde pressed her hands flat against his chest and felt for a heartbeat. Nothing. She pressed harder. Nothing. The horses were closer now, hooves like a second heartbeat drumming through the earth above her head, but she did not hear them. She heard nothing. There was only the terrible roaring silence under her palms, where a heart should have been beating and was not. No, she whispered. No, you don't get to leave, not like this, not after I said it. And she closed her eyes and reached for her gift. She had always been careful before, always measured, always kept the door only half open because her father had told her a long time ago that the power inside her would tear her apart if she ever let it run free. She did not care anymore. She threw the door wide. The warmth came roaring up from the dark beneath her heart, faster and harder than it had ever come, flooding down her arms and into her hands and pouring into the ruin of his chest. And she felt the poison, instantly. A cold, writhing, living darkness that recoiled from her touch like a thing that knew it had been found. Because it was alive in some terrible way. It was aware. And it recognized exactly what she meant to do to it. It fought back. The pain that tore through Isolde then was worse than anything she had ever pulled into herself. Worse than the pup crushed under the cart. Worse than the fever she had taken from her mother a lifetime ago. This was not a wound. This was corruption itself. Hatred made liquid. A thing designed from its first drop to destroy from the inside out. She did not stop. She pulled it into herself in great burning ropes, and she felt it spread through her chest, and up her throat, and into the roots of her tongue, and her vision went white at the edges, and somewhere very far away she heard a woman screaming, and understood dimly that the woman was her. And then, deep in the dark, the poison inside her met something else, something that had always been there. Something that had lived beneath the healing warmth her whole life, buried so deep she had never once touched the bottom of it. A second gift. A shadow standing behind the light. Isolde gasped, and the understanding flooded through her all at once, whole and terrible and complete. She could take wounds into herself. She had always known that. But she could also give them back. She could push. She could send the damage out of her own body and into another. She had always had two hands. She had only ever been allowed to use one. And with that knowledge, a door she had not known was locked came off its hinges entirely. The memory rose up to meet her. That night. She had been 14. Her mother wasting away in the far room, growing lighter and grayer by the day, until she was more shadow than woman. And Isolde, desperate, foolish 14, had pulled the whole sickness into herself, had felt it rotting through her own organs, had known with a child's cold clarity that she was going to die, and in her panic, in her animal need to live, she had pushed it back out, not into the empty air, into her father, who had been kneeling beside her. He had recovered. His stronger body had thrown the sickness off within days. But he had felt it. He had felt what she had done to him. And he had looked at his own daughter with a fear so total, so bottomless, that she had understood in that moment exactly what she was. A weapon. One that could turn healing into harm with a single thought. And her mother had died anyway. 3 days later. Despite everything. Despite the price. Her father had blamed her for that too. For the mother she failed to save. For the sickness he had suffered. For the fear that had crawled into his chest that night and never left. And Sorel watching from the doorway, too young to understand what she had seen, but old enough to never forget it. So he had bound her gift, locked away the half of it that could give, and left her only the half that could take. He had told the pack she was cursed, contaminated, a demon in a girl's skin. And every wolf had believed him because it was so much easier to fear her than to look at what he had done. But the truth was so much simpler than the story. Her father had not cast her out because she was dangerous. He had cast her out because he was afraid of what she might one day do to him. And now, with a dead prince cooling under her hands and stolen poison screaming through her veins, the binding her father had set on her 14 years ago shattered like ice under a hammer. Isolde opened her eyes. The cellar door crashed inward. Torchlight flooded the dark, and down the narrow stone stairs came men in royal armor, blades already drawn. And at their head, stepping down into the light with cold, unhurried satisfaction, was Prince Alaric. He had his brother's face. That was the horror of it. The same dark hair, the same sharp jaw. But where Torvin's eyes held warmth even under all his grief, Alaric's held nothing at all. They were empty, flat, the eyes of something wearing a man's shape and finding it a comfortable fit. "Well," Alaric said softly, taking in the scene, "isn't this a picture? The rejected little Omega weeping over a prince who's been dead for days." Isolde did not move from Torvin's side. She could feel the poison still churning inside her. She could feel the new terrible knowledge of her own gift humming in her hands. But she was weak, so weak. To use it now might kill them both. Both. He isn't dead, she said. He will be. Alaric came down the last of the stairs and his guards spread out behind him like a black tide. The poison I gave him has no cure. It feeds on love, on tenderness, on every soft, foolish feeling he was ever weak enough to have. By now it should have eaten him whole. It didn't. Something flickered in those hollow eyes. Surprise quickly swallowed. Impossible. The dose was exact. The magic was flawless. Your magic, Ysolde said slowly, and the pieces were sliding together in her mind, even as she spoke, came from somewhere. Blood magic needs blood. Whose did you use? Alaric's smile came back, cruel and thin. Clever little thing. Does it matter? The witch is dead now. Your father saw to that. He was very eager to silence her once she'd done her work. Couldn't have anyone breathing a word that his precious bloodline carried magic in it, could he? The world tilted under Isolde. Her grandmother, Nestoria. The stories she had been told. The sudden illness that had taken the old woman. The way her father had refused ever after to so much as speak her name. My father, Isolde breathed, killed my grandmother, for you. He killed her for himself, Alaric corrected. I merely gave him the reason. She was one of the old blood witches, your Nestoria. One of the last who could bind a poison to the heart. She made this to protect me. He tilted his head, studying Isolde with cold curiosity. She looked rather like you in the end, the same eyes. She wouldn't have. Oh, she refused, at first. She had scruples, morals. His voice dripped contempt for the words. But everyone has a soft place to press, and hers was a granddaughter she'd been watching from afar. A gifted girl, cruelly cast out, alone in the forest, surviving on roots and mushrooms. His smile widened, and it was the most obscene thing she had ever seen. She made the poison in exchange for one promise, that I would leave you alone, that you would be permitted to live out your small, wretched little life in peace. Ysolde's hands had begun to shake. She died for me. She died for you, Alaric agreed. And your loving father cut her down before she could warn a single soul what we'd done. So you see, sweet girl, everyone you've ever mourned you can lay at the feet of your own blood. Isn't family a wonderful thing? Grief and rage rose in Ysolde's chest, tangled so tightly she could not tell one from the other. Her grandmother had died to buy her a scrap of peace, had poured her own life into a curse to keep a monster from touching her. And her own father had murdered the old woman to keep the family's secret buried in the dark alongside everything else. There's always a way to break a curse, Isolde said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Every poison has an antidote. Every binding has a key. Not this one. Alaric stepped closer, sure of himself, now savoring it. The magic was bound to blood, the witch's blood, and the witch is dead. But her bloodline isn't. Alaric stopped. Ysolde rose to her feet. She swayed. She was pouring sweat, and the borrowed poison still writhed inside her, and her grandmother's blood, she understood now, sang in her veins, in answer to the very curse it had made. That was why she could feel the darkness so clearly, why it had recoiled from her touch, why it fought her like a thing that knew her. The curse was tied to her bloodline, which meant she had in her own two hands the power to unmake it. You made a mistake, she said quietly. You killed the witch, but you left her heir alive. You cast me out. You made sure I had nothing, no pack, no name, no home, nothing left in this whole world to lose. She took a step toward him, and something in her face made his guards' hands tighten on their swords. And then you buried the only man in this kingdom who ever once looked at me and saw a person worth saving. Take her, Alaric said. The guards surged forward. Ysolde reached down into herself, found the writhing corruption in her veins and pushed. The darkness exploded out of her. It struck the first guard like a fist made of winter and dropped him where he stood. The second fell a breath later, then the third. The poison she had pulled from Torvin's dying body, the corruption that had been eating him alive, she channeled it out of herself and into every man who stood between her and the prince who had ordered a kingdom to lie. They did not die. She did not let them die. But they fell one after another, gasping and frozen and paralyzed, feeling, for one endless moment, exactly what Torvin had felt as the dirt closed over his face. Alaric stumbled backward, and his empty eyes filled at last with something real. Fear. "What are you?" he whispered. "I'm my grandmother's heir," Isolde said, and she kept walking, the last of the borrowed poison crackling through her fingers. "And I am going to finish what she started." She reached for him, and behind her ragged and impossible Prince Torvin drew a breath. The sound of it stopped Isolde mid-stride. She turned, her heart slamming, and there he was, alive. Struggling up onto one elbow, his face gray, but his eyes clearer than they had been in days. And on his chest, the black lines had gone still. They had faded from black to a dull, spent gray. They were still there, threaded across his skin like old scars. But they were no longer spreading. They were no longer killing him. "Why, Solde," he rasped. "Don't." She did not understand. She had Alaric cornered. She had the power right there in her open hand to send every drop of that poison into his veins and let him feel the grave he had dug for his own brother. "He deserves it," she said. "Maybe." Torvin's eyes found hers, and they held on. "But you don't deserve to become the thing that gives it to him. Not for me. Not for anyone. He murdered your mother, Torvin. He tried to murder you. He killed my grandmother. He took everything from both of us." "And if you kill him," Torvin said, dragging himself upright, swaying but certain, "then you become him. You become someone who ends her problems with poison instead of mending them. You spent your whole life being told you were a weapon." His voice cracked clean through. "Don't hand him the last word. Don't let him make you into the very thing they always swore you were." Alaric, watching this from the corner where fear had backed him, saw the opening and lunged for it. "How touching," he sneered, though his voice shook. "The dying prince and his Omega savior. Do you really imagine this changes anything? Let me live, and I walk back into that palace and tell our father that Torvin has lost his mind, that grief and poison have unmade him, that he must be put down for the good of the kingdom. Who do you think he'll believe, the son he mourned, or the corpse that crawled up out of a grave raving about betrayal? He'll believe me." A new voice, from the top of the stairs. Every head in the cellar turned. Alpha King Bramwell stood in the torchlight above them, and his presence filled that small stone room like a physical weight pressing down on the air. He was older than Isolde had imagined. His dark hair had gone through with iron. His face was carved deep with grief. But his eyes were clear, and they were sharp, and they were burning with a fury Isolde had never seen the like of. Beside him stood Sorel. Isolde's sister looked different somehow. Smaller. Uncertain in a way Isolde had never once seen her, and behind Sorel, bound in iron chains, his head bowed low, was Isolde's father, Holland. "Father," Torvin breathed. "I had a visitor this morning," the king said, and he began to descend the stairs, slow and deliberate, each step landing like a verdict. "A young woman, who claimed to know the truth about my son's death, about who had truly ordered it done." Sorel stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice was not cruel. It was not cold. It shook. "I saw them," she said. "The night they took the prince. I saw Alaric give the order. I saw all of it. And I said nothing, because I was afraid, and because I was jealous of my own sister, and because it was easier to be cruel than to be brave." Her eyes found Isolde's across the cellar, and there was something in them that had never been there before. "I have spent my whole life hating you because it was easier than looking at what our father was. I left the mill, and I told myself I'd let the wind decide. And then I couldn't. So I rode to the palace instead. It doesn't undo anything, I know that. But it's the first true thing I've done in years." "Lies," Alaric spat. "She's a rejected Omega's sister. Her word is worth nothing." "Her word," the king said, and his voice could have frozen open flame, "is confirmed by your own men, who found their tongues remarkably quickly once they understood what silence would cost them. By the servants who mixed your paralytic. By the stable hands who saddled your horses in the dark of that night." He turned then, and his terrible eyes came to rest on Holland, chained and bowed. "And by this one, who confessed everything when he was shown the depth of the grave he'd helped to dig, including how he bound his own daughter's gift to keep her from growing too strong, including how he threw her across a boundary stone to bury his family's secret in the forest along with her. Isolde stared at her father, at the man who had unmade her whole life to protect his own name. He would not lift his eyes to hers. He also confirmed, the king said more quietly now, and he looked at Isolde as he said it, that your grandmother was the witch, the one my youngest son commissioned, the one who made the poison. She tried to refuse, she tried to warn us, and your father silenced her before she could speak a word of it. The truth landed on Isolde in pieces, each one heavier than the last. Her father had not only cast her out, he had killed the one person in her family who had ever tried to protect her. He had let a prince be buried alive. He had let all of it happen, because the alternative was letting the world see what his bloodline truly carried. I had no choice, Holland said, and his voice was thin, cracked, small. If anyone had known what we were, what she was, what you are. You had a choice, Isolde said, flat, empty. You chose your name over your daughter, over your own mother. You chose to bury me alive too. You just used a boundary stone instead of a shovel. He had no answer for that. There was no answer for that. The king nodded to his guards. Take them both. Alaric will stand trial for the attempted murder of the crown prince, and Holland will answer for conspiracy and for the murder of Nestoria, his own mother. The guards moved, and Alaric, seeing the last door close, made one final desperate lunge across the cellar toward Isolde. Perhaps he thought to take a hostage. Perhaps he only wanted to hurt one more person before the end. He never reached her. Torvin moved faster than any dying man should have been able to move, throwing himself between them, and the two brothers crashed to the stone floor together. And when they rose, it was Torvin who held Alaric, pinned his forearm hard across his brother's throat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. I loved you, Torvin said at last, quiet, ruined. Do you understand that, for 20 years through everything I loved you, and you smiled at me, and you buried me alive? You were always the favorite, Alaric choked out. And for the first time the emptiness in his eyes gave way, and beneath it was something almost human, something that had been starving for a very long time. Mother looked at you like the sun rose out of your face. Father never once looked at me at all. I spent my whole life standing in a doorway watching while the two of you had everything I ever wanted. So you decided to destroy me, Torvin said, instead of ever once telling me you were drowning. His voice was thick with a grief that had no bottom. You wasted your whole life hating me for a thing I never chose. I would have given it to you, brother. Any of it. All of it. You only ever had to ask. Alaric's face crumpled, and whatever had been hollow in him for so long finally cracked open, and out of it came something raw and terrible, the tears of a man weeping for the first time in a life spent making certain no one could ever see him do it. Take him, Torvin said, and released his brother and stepped back. The guards took hold of Alaric's arms and drew him up the stairs. He did not scream. He did not curse. He only wept quietly all the way up into the light, and no one in that cellar, not one soul, could bring themselves to look away from it. When the cellar was empty at last, Torvin turned to Isolde. You saved me, he said simply. Twice, once from the grave, and once from becoming what I hated. He crossed the small space between them and took her face in both of his hands. Isolde, I don't have the words for what you are to me. I don't think the words exist, but I intend to spend the rest of my life looking for them. You're a fool, she whispered. Completely, he agreed. And I love you. And I don't care anymore who hears it or what it costs or what grows across my chest when I say it. He looked down. The gray lines lay still and spent against his skin. It seems the curse is broken. Your grandmother's magic run through your blood unmade it, so I'll say it as many times as I please. He smiled, and it reached all the way to his eyes the first time she had ever seen it do so. I love you. I love you too, Isolde said, and it did not kill him. He kissed her. 6 months later, Isolde stood in the great hall of Oskhaven in a gown of silver and white, and felt like a woman wearing someone else's life. The hall was packed. Nobles she had once been forbidden to look upon, common wolves who had traveled for days, all of them come to watch a rejected Omega bond with the crown prince of the realm. Torvin stood beside her whole and healthy, the crown restored to the head it belonged on. The black lines were gone entirely now. All that remained was a single thin scar over his heart, and Isolde thought she would not have had it any other way, because it was proof. Proof of how close they had come. Proof of what they had walked out of together. The king watched from his throne, and when Isolde had first knelt before him months ago and protested that she was only a rejected Omega with no name and no bloodline worth mentioning, he had leaned forward and told her in a voice meant for the whole court to hear that she carried the blood of the woman who had died trying to save his son. That she carried the gift that broke a curse no one else in the kingdom could touch. That she carried the love of his heir, and that this all of it was more than enough. But that was not the thing Isolde thought of standing in the great hall in her borrowed silver. She thought of how certain they had all been. The wolves at the boundary stone. Her father. An entire people who had looked at her and decided that the safest thing they could do was throw her away and never look back. And how wrong they had been about every part of it. The gift they feared had saved a life. The girl they buried in the forest was the woman who now stood in the light of a great hall while a kingdom held its breath. And the very thing they had called a demon in her blood had turned out in the end to be the only thing in all the world strong enough to break the darkness. When the vows came, Torvin took her hands. "I was dead when you found me," he said, and his voice carried to the farthest corner of the silent hall. "Not just buried, dead inside, hollow. I'd spent my whole life keeping everyone at arm's length because I was so afraid of what it might cost me to let them close. And then a woman the whole world had thrown away reached into the dirt with her bare hands and refused to let me stay buried." His hands tightened on hers. "You saw me when no one else would even look, and I will spend every day I have left making certain you never go unseen again." And when it was Isolde's turn, her voice did not shake. "I was taught to hate the parts of myself that turned out to matter most," she said. "I was told what I carried was a curse. I believed it for so long that I forgot there was ever anything else to believe." She looked up at him. "And then you looked at me like I mattered. You trusted me with your life and your secrets and the very things I'd been taught to be ashamed of. And you loved them anyway." Her voice steadied and rang out clear and strong through the great hall. "So I'm not afraid anymore. Not of what I am. Not of what it costs to say it. Because you taught me that the truest things are worth any price." The priest pronounced them bonded. Torvin kissed her, and the great hall of Oskhaven erupted. But as they turned to walk out together, hands laced tight, Isolde caught sight of two figures at the edge of the crowd. Sorel, watching with an expression that was almost pride. There was a long road ahead of the two of them. Isolde knew that. 3 moons of silence and a lifetime of cruelty did not mend in an afternoon. But her sister had stood before a king and told the truth when a lie would have been so much easier. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a door left open, a possibility that had not existed before. And beside Sorel stood a young woman Isolde had met for the first time only a month ago. A girl with Isolde's own coloring and their grandmother's sharp dark eyes. A cousin found during the long unraveling of their family's secrets. A girl who had begun only recently to show a gift for taking away pain. The bloodline went on. The gift would pass to a new generation. And this time, Isolde thought, watching the girl watch her with wide and hopeful eyes, it would be nurtured, not feared. This time there would be no boundary stone, no silence, no shovel in the dark. Torvin leaned close as they stepped out into the sunlight. "What are you thinking?" Isolde smiled up at him, at this man who had been buried in the dark and had walked out of it beside her into the light. "I'm thinking," she said, "that they tried to bury us both, and look what grew instead." He laughed and pulled her close, and they stepped out together into the sun. They had been rejected, cast out, left for dead in the cold and the dark. But they had found each other down there in the black, and they had clawed their way back up to the surface with bare and bleeding hands and stubborn, unbreakable hearts. And in the years that followed, the wolves of Oskhaven would tell the story 1,000 times. The tale of the Omega who dug a prince out of his grave, the healer who broke an unbreakable curse, the love that simply refused to stay buried. But Isolde always knew the truth of it was simpler than any story they told. She had reached into the dirt because she could not bear to let a stranger die alone in the dark. And in the saving of him at long last, she had finally saved herself.